Hello, I'm Steve Adolph, and welcome to, yet again, what exactly is Agile and why should you care? Again. Now you may be looking at this and going, come on, Steve. We've been doing Agile now for well over 15 years. We're actually doing it well. I think we know what Agile is. Yet I would like to put forward this hypothesis that a lot of organizations are struggling with Agile and even failing at it because they are not able to answer this question. In fact, they're coming up with the wrong answer to this question. What is Agile? And therefore, they're not really able to exploit and get the benefits of Agile. So, Agile really entered the software development collective consciousness back in 2001 with the Agile Manifesto. And it was a unifying principle for a set of lightweight methodologies that actually seemed to work. And in fact, there was a lot more reports of how these different methodologies work, the improvement in productivity, customer satisfaction, reduction in costs, that started getting more and more people excited and interested in adopting Agile methodologies. Now, the scope of these methodologies was the team. Take our classic Scrum machine. We start with a Scrum Master who owns a product backlog. We have a cross-functional team that can take items from that backlog, turn them into a potentially shippable increment or consumable increment, and we have a Scrum Master who helps facilitate the process. What a lot of the team-level methodologies, though, sort of were vague or fuzzy on is what happens upstream. Where did the product owner get all those wonderful backlog items? And exactly where did that potentially shippable or consumable increment go? And that's been a lot of the problems. How does this team fit into an enterprise? Because a lot of Agile methodologies sort of had the implicit assumption that the product owner, or their equivalent of the product owner, was somehow omniscient, had the ability to come up with all the backlog items and prioritize that, and also that when the team finished their work, it went directly into production. Well, that's not the reality for a lot of organizations, and that's actually where a lot of the struggles are beginning to emerge. And also, there's very much a software focus. If you look at the manifesto, it is the manifesto for Agile software development, and it's seeking to come up with better ways of creating software. But software alone does not make products. There's a lot more to it. And this has resulted, in my view, of people taking a very, very much a practice-based approach to defining Agile. In fact, almost becoming puritanical in the definition of Agile and how it should be implemented in teams. It's led to the point where sometimes I wonder if the manifesto now says processes and tools over individuals and interactions. So Agile, we've been very successful in applying Agile concepts to small individual software teams. But it seems that we are basically improving the execution and not really understanding, well, what happens to the upstream and to the downstream processes. This, what you see here, is an example of how a lot of organizations have so-called adopted Agile by building these hybrid or so-called Waterscrumming frameworks, where you see here that yes, our build teams, our dev teams are running Scrum and we have great execution, but the upstream processes are still very slow and so are the downstream processes. So is this organization really Agile? Have we actually got any benefit from Agile? And ultimately, too, what I've seen a lot of organizations, because of this model, you see people looking at the business looking at IT from the point of view, that's great, guys. We really love you adopting this Agile thing because it's reducing the cost. Effectively, the business sees Agile as a IT science experiment that's dedicated to reducing costs. So what's the real problem we're trying to solve? Why am I talking to you? Because the problem an Agile solves, or is trying to solve, is actually this one. This is the best available data, which suggests that of all the work that we do, all the software development work we do, the new systems and new products we create, probably 60% is never used. It's waste. It's not wanted by our stakeholders. And basically less than 20%, basically 1/5 of the software that we create is actually found useful by our stakeholders. Now think of all the weekends where you stayed at work, where you missed your kids' soccer game or their ballet lesson, where you stayed late and didn't see your family in the evenings, such that you could create that red waste there. So something is wrong. Just simply being able to build that red waste faster is not being very efficient. And one of the great sages of business, Peter Drucker, really put it succinctly. He said, basically, there's nothing quite so useless as doing with great efficiency something that should not be done at all. And that's part of my argument about we're answering the question, what is Agile, incorrectly. We're looking at it as strictly a software development process that helps us create waste faster and more efficiently. Well, the question might come up to, why do we bother creating waste? Why don't we just focus on creating the useful stuff? Well, that's the rub, isn't it? We really don't know up front what is the useful. Otherwise, it would be easy. We wouldn't have this problem. And you see, the very nature of software brings about a lot of this waste for us. Some of you may be familiar with this. This is a so-called cone of uncertainty. And this was developed by Barry Boehm in his book, Software Engineering Economics, where he did a study of thousands and thousands of software projects and developed this model here, which showed at the early stages of a software development project, the scope of the project could have a variance of 16-1. In other words, we could overestimate or underestimate the scope of a system by a factor of 4 either way. And then as we progressed and learned more about the system, that scope began to narrow. This is frequently called the cone of uncertainty. Now, guess where in our traditional software development techniques we lock down the requirements? You got it. Right up here at the point we sometimes call maximum ignorance. And for all the analysis models that we have and all the work and all of the JAD sessions we do and focus groups we do, the problem is we still end up creating all that waste if we're trying to lock all our requirements down up front. And this, leads to something that's sometimes humorously called Humphrey's Law. The user will know what they want out of the system when they see it in production. And so here you can see a conversation, starting to take place. And we're asking the stakeholder, hey, what do you think of our system? And they're going, well, it's not exactly what I would hope for. And we say, well, that's what was in the specs. That's what you told us you wanted. And their response is, well, yeah, that might be the case, but it's not going to work for us. In other words, we've just created a lot of that red stuff. And why does this happen? Why is software so hard to get a handle on and understand what is valuable? Well, the fact is, software is disruptive. It's not like anything we've developed before. It fundamentally changes processes. You don't simply automate a process with software. You fundamentally change it. And think of all the industries that have sort of fallen by the wayside as software and new systems. I mean, who goes to a video store anymore? Who buys books at a bookstore? I mean, I love used bookstores, but I get most of my books online now. And think of the way that your viewing habits on television have changed. And a number of companies that have also fallen by the wayside, some would say that they couldn't get a handle on how to manage the software process. And for those of you who are saying, well, we're in a slow-moving industry, or we're in the financial services, I have one word for you: blockchain. Think about that one, and think about the disruptive effect it will have on the way that you conduct business in the next 5 years. So software is disruptive. It fundamentally changes the way people work together, and because it fundamentally changes, our subject matter experts, the people we're relying on for our requirements, guess what? They're learning what the system does at about the same rate we are, because they're going off into new territory that we haven't seen before. That's what disruption does. So let's compare this now. Here's a sort of the traditional way that we run a project. We have sort of our initial state, we have something that's spec'd by the requirements, and then we draw that dotted line there is the plan, and that gets us to what our software requirement specs say. And we can execute on that, and we could actually execute on that efficiently and deliver what the software requirement spec said. But is that necessarily what's valuable and what our stakeholders want? I mean, we can execute well, but we could end up creating a lot of that red waste along the way. What would be a different approach? What if we developed a little bit of the system and then got some feedback and realized, oh, we have to make a course correction, we have to pivot, and we put something else out there again, and well, we get more feedback and we change, and we keep repeating this process, getting feedback, having a dialogue with our stakeholder so that we can navigate away from that red and be closer or be in the green zone. And so this is where we get into the idea of adaptive planning. This is not just a software thing. This is working with the stakeholders upstream from the team, and also learning what they really believe is valuable, be able to create more of that green. Now, think about this for a moment. Traditionally, we've called variations like this scope creep, and we've actually tried to suppress that. Now what we're saying is maybe that scope creep really represents the learning that's taking place and our stakeholders realizing what's really valuable, what's in that green, and move us away from that red. So here's where I'm starting to get to the idea of what Agile really is. Agile is about time, using time for competitive advantage. It's not just a software methodology. And it's been around for this idea of using time for competitive benefit, it's been around for a long time. Two of my favorite writers on the topic one was United States Air Force Colonel John Boyd, who developed something called the OODA model. And it was a model of rapid decision making that was adopted by the United States Marine Corps. But he defined agility as effectively execute your decision loop faster than your competition. Can we learn faster than our competition is effectively how I would paraphrase his ideas for business. George Stalk, who wrote the book Time-Based Competition, said, the way leading companies manage time represents the most powerful new source of competitive advantage. So we're getting here to the idea that Agile is not just a software methodology. It's in fact a competitive strategy. And I'd like to give you an example here. We've been thinking about, a lot of organizations have been thinking about Agile as strictly a cost reduction mechanism. We have to really start thinking of it as basically a competitive strategy. And a lovely case study is our so-called Honda-Yamaha wars. Now, this is a bit dated. We're talking about an event that took place in the 1980s, but I think it makes the point. So, 1980s, Yamaha and Honda are in vicious competition. I mean, these companies hate each other, seriously. So, Yamaha decides they are finally going to bury Honda. So what Yamaha does is they build a massive factory, one of the largest motorcycle manufacturing facility in the world. Of course, the intent here is reduce costs, economies of scale. And this is a pretty good competitive strategy if you think about it, because if I can flood the market with cheap motorcycles, I can either undercut Honda and drive them out of business, or I can command superior profits. So how did Honda respond? Well, they didn't go out and build an even bigger factory. That would just have been a war of attrition. Honda did something much different. What they did is, rather than focus on cost, they started focusing on innovation and learning. They increased the speed at which they were introducing new motorcycle models. So rather than having 15 new models a year, they had 30. It allowed them to put new models out into the marketplace very, very quickly, learn what consumer tastes and demands were, and quickly innovate. And during this time period, Honda came out with shaft drive, four-valve or four-stroke engines, multi-valve engines. And not only did Yamaha have a hard time responding to Honda's rapid change, Yamaha ended up with years of unsellable inventory. Effectively, Honda was able to use time to outcompete Yamaha. Honda was able to use time to find out what was really valuable and create more valuable green rather than the wasteful red. So, how would we define Agile then? Agile is a philosophy for using time to competitive advantage. It's a philosophy of fast feedback and learning, and not just responding to change. One of the things that Honda did, not only did they just respond to consumer taste, Honda was able to make motorcycles a fashion statement. In other words, they were able to shape the marketplace. They were able to shape change and competition to create superior value. So we're seeing here, Agile is not just an IT execution strategy. And just having better execution is not really getting the benefits. It is really a business strategy. So, if you look at the manifesto, you can definitely see, this is an instance or a derivative of time-based competition. After all, this is what this is really saying. Individuals and interaction, collaboration, fast cycles. What the Agile Manifesto is about is encouraging us to have fast decision-making cycles, to get feedback very, very quickly, to learn what is really valuable to our stakeholders. It's not just an execution strategy. So we got to take Agile really beyond the team. I mean, this comment here came from one of my clients once, what I thought it hit it square. They said, we're really great at writing software, but we have a really hard time delivering product. Software is great, but ultimately the value is created by the product you deliver to your stakeholders. So, the question we're asking is, how does your team fit into the overall organization? We really need to look at a more seamless approach, because something I really get annoyed with is this concept of, well, there's the business and then there's IT. Seriously, as the last time I looked, IT is part of the business. And so we have to look beyond Agile being a team execution strategy. It has to be a business strategy of being able to create fast feedback cycles so the business can learn very quickly what is working in the market, what is in that green, and how to avoid what's in that red. We also have to start taking ourselves away from thinking of Agile as just a collection of practices and restricting ourselves and saying Agile is only embodied in a set of practices. We have to think of, how do we work together to enable time-based competition? How do we work together to be Agile? So the idea here is not to do more for less cost, because that's what Yamaha did, right? They simply reduced the cost of creating waste. We want to be able to take a page from Honda and say, how do we learn quickly? Notice here though, this is not so much a cost focus. The focus is on creating more value. Now, before you say, well, Steve, I'm sorry, we have to watch cost. I'm the owner of a small business, and trust me, I know what it means to have good cost discipline. When you have to put a mortgage on your house to make payroll, yeah, you learn the importance of good cost discipline. But what it's saying here is don't sacrifice creation of value and fast feedback for cost discipline. Cost cannot be the dominating and sole criteria for becoming agile. So this also gives you a different perspective of how the economics of agile work. We want to be able to focus on the most valuable things. Being able to get fast feedback can tell us that this is the strategy we should pursue in creating new products. You can see that there is definitely a diminishing return if we were to basically not take in new learning and new information. We would create less value. So in the end, basically, Agile is a strategy for using time for competitive success. It's the disruptive nature of software means traditional practices are suboptimal. All the practices we've learned are based on a much more slow changing environment. We have to realize the very disruptive nature of software itself is accelerating the rate of change. Like I said, think on financial institutions that have stood for decades. What will be the impact of blockchain on them in the next 5 years? The Agile Manifesto, in my view, is still a valid document. It gives us guidance for how to have a time-based competition strategy. It is an example of a time-based competition strategy. But dogmatically following agile practices creates this rigidity and really suppresses learning and just basically is focusing on execution. We're not thinking about overall strategy. Finally, Agile's not a direct cost reduction strategy. Clearly, you think about Honda. Honda didn't focus on a cost reduction strategy. I imagine they had good cost controls in place. But what they sought was to create value faster. Agile is a value creation strategy. And finally, Agile is a very old competition strategy. It wasn't invented by the software community, which means there's a lot of others we can learn from to help improve the way that we create software. So, for more information, there's a couple of really good books that I've actually made references to here. Chet Richard's Certain to Win, which is a description of Colonel John Boyd's work applied to business, and also George Stalks and Thomas Howitt's book, Competing Against Time. This is where you can find the Honda-Yamaha Wars case study. So take an opportunity to get these books, to read them, because they're invaluable to help you understand what the right answer to the question is, what is Agile?